I'm Sara McFadden, and I'm here with Deniz Bayramoglu, who is an attorney from Las Vegas, Nevada, visiting as a convention visitor. Not to any political organization, and to Deniz, and he's nice enough to be answering our questions about what happened in Nevada. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And we didn't talk about what happened at the caucus. Now, you're from Clark County, the largest population center in Nevada.
That's right. 75% of Nevadans live in Clark County.
Now, at that caucus, do you want to share what it was like at your particular caucus spot?
Well, at the precinct level, it starts off as, they advertise it as a meeting amongst neighbors. So really, that's really what it was. It was about my neighborhood and another neighborhood, a small little precinct that meets, and we had 50 people show up. And then you just kind of talk about, they read some of the formalities and they go through it, and then you vote. And we ended up with one of very few precincts in the state of Nevada that tied. So we had 25 for Hillary, 25 for Sanders.
And how was that resolved?
In typical Vegas fashion, we had it was done by a deck of cards, actually.
Really?
And the rules are extremely strict. You have, I don't know if you can quote me on this, but I believe you take a brand new deck of cards, you remove the jokers, and you shuffle exactly 7 times. Not 6, not 8, 7. And then you have one person from each delegation pick one card, and the highest card wins. And I believe aces are high. And then they have another tiebreaker, which we didn't have to get into, thank goodness, for if it's the same number, which suit is the order of. You figure Ohio, or I believe it was Ohio, they do it so much easier. It's just a flip of a coin. But
we've experienced that in Florida.
Yeah. We can't make anything easy.
So it was tied. So do you have any information about what happened at some other caucus sites? Like, we're hearing what could be rumors about the casino sites and how that worked. Do you have any information about that?
No, I wasn't at any of those. I don't really know how that worked. I know that had been set up by Harry Reid because he wanted to make sure people that had shifts at the casinos could participate in the process. Otherwise, they'd have to drive all the way home and all the way back. So those were more, I think they had them set up as at-large locations, but I'm not really sure how that ended up working.
Fair enough. So you, at your caucus, I believe you said you were elected?
Yes, I was elected a delegate to the Clark County Convention.
Okay. And so that would be the second tier caucus?
Yes, that's the second tier. So, like I said, the Nevada Democratic Party is generally a very Byzantine system of rules that they have in place. It's extremely complicated, and I want to say that the people running it aren't being malicious or trying to do something wrong, but at the end of the day, they're given a very complex set of rules, and they do their best to try and run with them, but sometimes people aren't perfect. So even the Clark County chair of the Democratic Party, he struggled with containing some of the delegates there. And then Roberta Lang, the Nevada state head, I think she also did a poor job running the state convention. But
so
they do the best with what they've got.
Can we back up to the second tier?
Sure.
And explain what happened. We talked about it earlier,
yes.
But what happened at the second tier that
So the second tier, like I said, with this Byzantine labyrinth of rules, at the second tier at the county conventions, they have the ability to send delegates to the state convention on the equivalent of one state delegate per 150 registered Democrats. So in Clark County, that amounted out to, I believe, somewhere in the order of 3,000 state delegates. So we had, our state convention was not like this. With one per 150. So in any event, what happened was we showed up, and there was, I think, 3,000 elected. No, it was on the order of, I want to say, 6,000 elected. But the people that showed up, it was around 2,400 and 2,900 for each side. But the interesting thing is, and this is a really weird hitch that they should probably really fix in the Nevada system, that you have elected delegates that show up from both sides, and then you have elected alternates that show up from both sides. But then you also have something called unelected alternates. And they're just people that participated in the first phase that could not participate in the second phase because they were not elected. So I guess they want to increase participation So what they do is they have these people come, and if there's not enough seats, as I mentioned, they just fill them. So if you have 6,000 or 10,000, those are made up numbers for Clark County, and only 5,000 people showed up, or 6,000, like was the case, then the remaining empty seats get filled by these unelected alternates, which really have no bearing as to who they actually support. So they get seated as delegates, and they get to sway the election one way or another. So at the second level in Nevada, what happened was the Bernie supporters outnumbered the Hillary supporters, and I'm not sure what percentage of them were unelected delegates, but a portion of them were unelected delegates that showed up as Bernie supporters and were able to have a substantial majority over the Hillary delegates that were there. So we hear about the caucuses that happened, I believe they were February 20th. The caucus results were, I think, a 5-point or 6-point victory for Hillary Clinton. Then you had the exact flip happen at the Clark County Convention, because you had a lot of people show. I mean, it was a failure to organize for Hillary Clinton's campaign, as well as these unelected delegates that showed up.
Right, and you mentioned that's how the rules work.
That's how the rules worked at that level, and that was the second tier. So the results flipped.
Okay.
And then when we went to the state convention, it was the exact opposite. There was no unelected delegates allowed.
Okay.
So that was not really an issue. But again, at the second level, I'm not really sure what the split was amongst the unelected delegates. It could have been 50-50, but my guess is, seeing the enthusiasm on the Bernie side, I'd say it was more heavily skewed towards the Bernie Sanders supporters.
And what happened with there were delegates that weren't seated from the second tier and the third tier?
I don't really know. I do know that there was an issue with the Credentials Committee and what they were doing, but I do know that the Credentials Committee was half Bernie delegates and half Hillary delegates. So, I mean, I'd like to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they had done it fairly, but I don't really know. I had heard that they were supposed to do it on a case-by-case basis, but for a large portion of them, they had actually just done it, just a blanket rule that they had not registered as Democrats. My guess, and this is completely unsubstantiated, is that these people were unelected delegates at the Clark County Convention, that nobody ever bothered to check to see if they were actually registered Democrats at the Clark County level. I think that's part of the failures of the Nevada Democratic Party and the Clark County Democratic Party, is that they were not prepared to handle such a large turnout. Which is ironic, because about half of the delegates actually showed up. So they didn't bother to check the credentials of these peoples that were seated as unelected delegates. So I'd like to give the state party more credit and say that this was a failure of Clark County.
What about the address by Barbara Boxer? What was your reaction to that?
Oh, that was not good. The whole day started off, it was supposed to start at 9 o'clock. The chair didn't start things on time. And then I think by 9:45, they had the preliminary credentials report, which I understand the process a little bit better than others that were there. They thought that was the final delegate count. And after they voted on that's the thing that you see on YouTube, where the nays sound louder than the yays, and it's impossible to really know because it was so close. I think it was within 30 votes, so it was like within a percentage point. So I'm not really sure how she could tell by the yelling, but I felt the nays were louder, but I also think that they were more Clinton supporters at the time. So ultimately, she might have gotten the vote count right, but the way she did it was it could have been handled better. So it upset a lot of Bernie supporters there. A lot of them thought that was the final count. A lot of them were not happy about that, and that's when all hell broke loose.
Did Barbara Boxer speak after that, or before?
She did. It was a little bit after that. So I think they had the preliminary credentials ruling, and then the actual adoption of the rules, both of which were very close votes and based on a voice vote, which were ultimately decided by the chairwoman, Roberta Lang. And she just decided that, rightfully or wrongfully, we don't know how many of the actual delegates were present in the room at the time of the vote, because the numbers were so close. If you had 30 Hillary delegates in the bathroom at the time of the vote, technically the rules may not have passed. But again, there's no way to know unless you do a count. So I think it really reflects on the system and how the system needs to be changed.
When Barbara Boxer spoke, what was your personal reaction to that?
I think that was one of the few times I was actually motivated to boo I wasn't. I mean, there were some extremists on the Bernie side as well as on the Hillary side, so I wasn't always on board with what they were doing. But she was. At first, she came up. It seemed like she said, "Okay, well, they just were unhappy about a vote. I'll go up. I'm Barbara Boxer. I'm a senator. I'm gonna go up there and I'm gonna unify these people." She tried. To her credit, she said, "We're Democrats. We need to come together." But the Bernie delegates were just not having it. And when that happened, she turned nasty, and the speech quickly became patronizing and antagonizing. And instead of trying to bring the party together, she basically said she called the Bernie's delegates bullies, and that she's used to standing up to bullies, and she was tired of this. And basically, she did everything you don't want to do if you're trying to calm somebody down, especially people that are fired up. So I felt that she did not handle herself well at all.
At what point I understand that there was a call for a paper vote or some kind of a recount?
Well, there were various motions made one way or another. My understanding is that under the rules of the Democratic Party of the state of Nevada, that you cannot have motions from the floor. You can have a petition which is signed by 20% of the delegates in attendance, and that will be considered. But that you can't bring motions from the floor because ultimately, I mean, I agree with that, although many people won't from the Sanders side, because you could essentially filibuster a convention by doing that, just motion after motion after motion. People will just leave. And that's not the goal that we're trying to achieve. We want participation.
Was there a change in the rules about how people could approach the person in charge?
Not that I'm aware of. I know that the Rules Committee was, again, it was split 50-50 between Sanders and Clinton delegates. So as far as I know, they were drafted with the intention of having a quick and largely boring convention. I think ultimately for the party leadership, that's the best kind of convention when that occurs. You don't want headlines like what happened with the Nevada convention.
And how would you describe the reactions on either side as the convention, started to come to an eventual close?
I think the Bernie supporters were there, and they didn't want to leave. And there was a good contingent of people that didn't want to leave. And they were kicked out by security, by the police, because they were no longer wanted there after it was brought to a close.
I understand that one person was possibly arrested. Did you view that situation?
I didn't actually see the arrest, but I also heard that.
Yeah.
But I heard there was a fight.
Yeah. Did you see the infamous chair or non-chair incident?
No, see, the way they had it set up, like I said, I'm not sure. How many people were at the Florida convention? Delegates?
Probably 150.
Okay, we had about 4,000 people. Wow. So
huge difference.
Yeah, it was
hard to do a recount.
Yeah, it's impossible to. Well, and it's also impossible to know the difference of 30 voice votes. But anyway, I digress. The point is, there was a lot of people in the room, so I was pretty far away from the action. I was probably, I want to say 50 or 100 yards away from the front of the room. And that's where most of the action was happening, because people were congregating in front of the room, in front of the speaker, heckling her. That's where everything was going on.
And you mentioned you got frustrated enough?
Yeah, it was. I think Barbara Boxer's speech really put me over the edge. I initially had every intention of running to be a delegate to go to Philadelphia from the state of Nevada. But Barbara Boxer's speech really put me off to the point where I said, I'm not really sure I want to do this anymore. If this is how they're going to treat me, I mean, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm here. I'm just trying to voice my opinion. And I really felt like I was being shut down by Barbara Boxer. I mean, she's not my senator, so I guess she doesn't really speak for me, but I don't want people like that in the Democratic Party if they're going to try and shut me down. So I said, I'm not sure I want to be involved in this process anymore. And there are plenty of other people who do want to be involved in that process, because they're going to run for... basically, I said, listen, Bernie Sanders is not going to have any problem filling the 15 seats he was given from the state of Nevada. There's 4,000 people here. Of those, about 2,000 are Sanders delegates. So I'm not really worried about those seats being filled. So I said, I'm going to step out. I'm sure someone else who's way more gung-ho, let's do this, is going to step in. But I backed out. I said
How would you characterize the convention in general? We're hearing a lot of reports
Chaos.
of chaotic.
it was just chaos and
we're
chaos
hearing
and poorly
violence.
run.
We're hearing the word violence. Would you agree with that, or would you refute that, or?
I don't think it was violent. I personally didn't see any acts of violence. I saw people acting less than civilly, and I don't agree with how some of them carried themselves, but I wouldn't say violent. I mean, there may have been calls or yells and heckling, but I didn't really see any physical altercations.
Was that on both sides, or would you characterize one?
Well, I mean, of course, it happened on both sides. If a Bernie person was heckling, they'd get heckled back by the other side, and vice versa. But I mean, the idea of order just didn't exist. So I mean, and whose fault that is, I don't know. But on both sides, they were yelling back and forth, and I mean, it was completely divided. All the Sanders delegates on one side and Clinton delegates on the other.
Well, you must be famous because the whole world has been curious about this, so it's great to run into. Is there anything that you'd like to say that I didn't ask you about?
Not really. I think ultimately we need change at the state Democratic level in Nevada. I think that was the biggest problem. It's just, I mean, the way the rules were set up, just everything about it, I don't think they were ever prepared for this much enthusiasm. And when that much enthusiasm came up, they were kind of locked up, especially at the county level. So they just need to overhaul the system. So I think Harry Reid needs to very carefully look at the Nevada system and decide if he actually wants to continue with this caucus system, because it is a nightmare. And, you know, that's coming from a Bernie supporter, where Bernie usually does better in the caucus states.
Right.
But I think it needs to change because it's crazy. Going to a primary and having the results locked in is a lot easier and cleaner of a way to do it than having this at the first level, Hillary wins by 5 points. At the second level, Bernie wins by 6 points. And then flipping back again to the original results. So I think ultimately what happened in the state of Nevada reflects at the state convention what happened at the caucus level, in that Hillary won by 5 points. So I guess the result at the end of the day was correct. My biggest problem is with the process and how it was done. So they need to overhaul it. And my personal suggestion to the Democratic Party of the state of Nevada would be to just go with a primary. Have a vote, have it be done with, and then all the Byzantine arcane rules you want to do behind closed doors, determining who actually goes, is fine. But don't tinker with the numbers after they've been voted on.
Dennis, we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for your
Thank you, of
comments.
course.
It's great to meet you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. You were great.
Yeah, there you go.
Really good.
It's